Hero, villain, innovator, tyrant. Few figures in Indian history stir up as much passion and debate as Tipu Sultan, the 18th century ruler of Mysore. For some, he's this incredible freedom fighter who died resisting colonial rule. For others, a ruthless bigot. So our goal here is to try and navigate this incredibly complex legacy, to separate the man from the many, many myths that surround it. So, what on earth connects an 18th century Indian king to modern space exploration? Well, the answer is right there in that powerful statement. And that quote isn't from just anyone. It's from Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, India's own missile man. He was talking about the incredible impact of Tipu's rocketry, a legacy so profound it's actually commemorated in a painting at NASA headquarters. This really unexpected link is just the beginning of Tipu's amazing and, incredibly controversial story.
So which one is it? A visionary patriot who fought the British down to his very last breath, or a cruel tyrant who oppressed his own subjects? The truth, as we're about to find out, is a complete battlefield of competing stories, where historical facts are often used like weapons in today's political fights.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the Tiger of Mysore. Before we can even begin to judge the ruler, we have to understand the man. His entire life, really, was shaped by this unique upbringing, a real crucible of Eastern tradition and Western military science, getting him ready for a destiny of constant conflict and radical change.
Tipu was the son of Hyder Ali, a brilliant military commander who had basically seized power in the kingdom of Mysore. Now, while his father was a self-made man, he made sure Tipu got the best education money could buy. He studied the Quran, Islamic law, tons of languages, and this is crucial, he was also trained in modern warfare by French military officers. This blend of East and West, of scripture and strategy, would pretty much define his entire reign.
Section 2. A warrior against empire. Look, if there is one single point that all historians can agree on, it's this. Tipu Sultan was the most formidable, the most relentless enemy the British East India Company ever faced in India. His whole time as ruler was defined by this unending resistance to their growing power.
This timeline really shows a life just consumed by conflict. His fight against the British wasn't just one battle, it was a series of 4 brutal wars. It started when he was just a teenager, where he first showed off his strategic genius. In the Second War, he unleashed his game-changing rockets and took over after his father died. The Third War, though, was a crushing blow. It cost him half his kingdom and, in this deeply painful move, he was forced to surrender his 2 young sons as hostages to the British. But even after that humiliation, he just refused to give in. He rebuilt his forces for one final, fatal showdown.
So what were these famous rockets? His father had used them, but Tipu perfected them. And we're not talking about simple fireworks here. These things were iron-cased cylinders packed with gunpowder, sometimes with swords tied to them, and they could fly for up to 2 kilometers. When they were fired in massive volleys, they would just scream across the battlefield, breaking up enemy formations and causing absolute terror and chaos. They were a true psychological and military weapon.
And that number right there, 336, that really shows you the devastating impact of Tipu's technology. That's the number of British soldiers killed at the Battle of Polilur. In that battle, Tipu's rocket brigades specifically went after the British ammunition wagons, causing this catastrophic explosion that just shattered their lines. It was one of the most humiliating defeats the British ever suffered in India. But the story doesn't even end there. After Tipu's final defeat, the British took these rockets, reverse-engineered them, and created something called the Coorg rocket, which they then used in the Napoleonic Wars. So Tipu's innovation didn't just win a battle, it literally changed the face of global warfare.
This famous quote, it wasn't just a saying for him. It was the code he lived and died by. Giving up was never an option. For Tipu, it was way better to face total annihilation as a king, as a tiger, than to live in subjugation as a sheep.
Section 3. The Innovator King. But here's the thing. To focus only on the warrior is to miss half the story. Even as he was fighting for his kingdom's survival, Tipu was working relentlessly to transform it into a modern, prosperous state that could stand on its own 2 feet.
He was an obsessive modernizer, and every single reform served a purpose. He brought in a new calendar and a new coinage system to centralize his own authority. He established the Mysore silk industry, which, by the way, still thrives today, by sending people all the way to China for silkworms. He didn't just build an army, he built a navy and state-run trading companies. He poured money into infrastructure like roads and dams. Each of these moves was a piece of a bigger strategy to build a self-sufficient economic powerhouse that could rival the British East India Company, not just on the battlefield but in the marketplace.
And his vision wasn't just local, it was totally global. He knew he couldn't fight the British alone. He sent embassies to the Ottoman Sultan in Turkey, to the Shah of Persia, and to the ruler of Afghanistan, trying to build this pan-Islamic alliance. But what's most fascinating is how deeply inspired he was by the French Revolution. He actually set up a Jacobin club in his capital, planted a liberty tree, and even started calling himself Citizen Tipu. I mean, think about that. An 18th century Indian monarch embracing the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. It's just an incredible piece of history.
All right, Section 4, A Ruler's Two Sides. So we've seen the warrior and we've seen the innovator. Now we have to confront the most difficult and divisive part of his legacy, his religious policies. This is where the historical record becomes a minefield of contradictions, leading to the central controversy that really defines his memory today.
The crucial thing to understand here is that both columns you're looking at are supported by historical evidence. On the left, you have the patron. Records show he made grants to over 150 Hindu temples. His prime minister was a Brahmin. When the famous Sringeri temple was raided by the Marathas, Tipu himself paid to have it restored. But on the right, you have the persecutor. There are tons of accounts, some from his own writings, of brutal campaigns in rebellious regions where thousands of Hindus and Christians were forcibly converted and their places of worship were destroyed. His own sword had an inscription calling it a lightning strike for the infidels. And here's the thing, both of these men were Tipu Sultan.
So, how do we make sense of this? Well, historians are deeply divided. Some argue his cruelty was driven by religious fanaticism. Others say it was just statecraft. Brutal, for sure, but political. I mean, in that era, rebellion was crushed without mercy, and religion was often used as a tool of state power. It's also really important to remember that many of the most damning accounts come from his enemies, the British, who had a very clear reason to paint him as a tyrant to justify their own conquests.
Section 5. The Legacy and Debate. This unresolved conflict is absolutely central to his legacy. It helps explain not only his final, defiant moments, but also why, more than 2 centuries later, the argument over his name is still raging. So, let's take a look at how the tiger finally fell.
In 1799, the British put together this massive coalition with their Indian allies, the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad, and they laid siege to Tipu's capital. The end came faster because of betrayal from within. One of his own ministers, Mir Sadiq, was secretly helping the British. When the walls were finally breached, his French advisors begged him to escape through a secret passage and fight another day. He refused. He rode straight into the breach, sword in hand, and died fighting right there amongst his men.
You see, his death on the battlefield was just the beginning of another war, the war for his legacy. The British needed to justify what they'd done, so they amplified his cruelties and painted him as this absolute monster. Then later, Indian nationalists looking for anti-colonial heroes lifted him up as an early freedom fighter. And today, his name is still a political football, with all the complexity of his reign just boiled down to a simple hero or villain, to fit whatever modern agenda someone is pushing.
So, to sum up this incredibly complex figure, if you're going to remember 5 things, let it be these. 1. He was a pioneer of rocketry. 2. He was the fiercest resistor to British expansion. 3. He was a modernizer who totally reformed his state's economy. 4. He's a controversial figure because of those contradictory religious policies. And finally, 5. He's become this potent symbol, molded and remolded to serve all these different narratives.
And that leaves us with a final, really difficult question. The 18th century was an age of brutal conquest. Tipu was a product of that time. He used methods we now find completely abhorrent to fight for survival against the colonial power that was itself built on violence and exploitation. So, judging him by our standards today isn't easy. Maybe it's not even fair. He wasn't a simple hero and he wasn't a simple villain. He was the Tiger of Mysore. Brilliant, brutal, and ultimately a perfect reflection of the turbulent world he fought so fiercely to control.